doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
So look, to just jump straight into this, I'm going to turn to you, Alan. And I'd really love to get your views on those issues that I've just raised that we've heard so far from the RegTech investment community, which you are a part of and you advise on a regular basis. But really just start with giving us your insights. Give us a bit of a legal tour, if you like, of how you see RegTech on the continent, and also, please, just a couple of other points. Your top 5 regulatory recommendations, just like everyone else, please, for governments on the continent to implement that, in your view, will increase their chances of attracting RegTech investors' capital, and why you believe that will be the case. And also your top 5 go-to-market challenges, but the solutions to those challenges for investors that want to scale their investee RegTech companies across the continent. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you. When we look at Africa, I think if I can maybe give it a different perspective and focus initially maybe just on logistics. 90% of Africa's trade comes through ports. And then we must also take into account that we have a number of countries within Africa that are landlocked. So on the infrastructure side, effectively to trade within Africa and do business to business or business to consumer, in the end, it's getting the particular product to the business. Now, when you sit with 90% of your trade coming through ports, and if you take into account the fact that the systems that are in place in a number of ports, we're not looking at ecosystems like you have, for example, in Singapore or in Rotterdam. So you sit with delays, you sit with lack of information regarding vessels coming in, and then the whole logistics chain from rail or lack of rail, and then also your road haulage. So along that chain, you sit with lots of delays getting particular products in, and there is the opportunity, certainly, if I take one of the busiest ports in sub-Saharan Africa, and that's Durban, where they are looking at modernizing ports within that area. And that effectively is to look at how they can address issues around the logistics chain. So when you look at what governments can do in Africa, certainly the most important issue is really addressing the logistics issue and getting product to business within the shortest possible time. And then obviously the technological systems that you can have to support that infrastructure. I think the second point, which one of the earlier speakers just touched on, we have a number of fiber optic cables being introduced. We've got the Ikiano CCOM route. We've also got the 2Africa fiber optic cable that is being installed. And that effectively will assist to speed up internet and accessibility. Now, what government needs to look at attracting RegTech in the venture capital, I think in each particular country, you're looking at the internal trade structures, for example, the company formations, and the ease of investment that is being brought. You're also looking at how small business ventures to be set up and the ease with which that is done. You're also looking at certainly when investors go into particular countries, the question obviously is, do you get your capital out? Are you able to get remittance of dividends? So those are some of the issues that investors would look at when you go into particular countries. Then also to ease up investments, again, at the same time when you invest, where companies sit with IP, whether it's in the form of technology that is being licensed in, or whether it's through their branding or through any IP that they provide into the country. The question is obviously whether the country is able to provide protection for that IP. We also have issues on brands, to what extent the country is able to deal with counterfeit goods, again with goods coming into particular countries, issues around standards, because on a business or consumer perspective, you want to know that the particular product that you get in, that there is brand value attached to the product, and that if there are issues, to what extent you are able to then have recourse when the product it doesn't perform that you require it to do. Now, within that framework also, does the particular country provide for its cyber law framework, electronic communication transactions, and to what extent you are able to get access to the courts and effectively deal with dispute resolution. Then within that framework also the issue of data and privacy protection, when you as a business engage via electronic communication transactions, is your data protected? And I think within the same framework also, if you take the logistics chain around all of the information that comes out of there, to what extent that can be protected. So the other aspect also within a particular government, access to finance when people invest, or if it's a small business, how do you deal with the finance issue? Also when people go into the market and when the business is set up, to what extent do you deal with market conditions? For example, antitrust and competition matters. So those are just some of the issues that I think one needs to take into account. I think also on the infrastructure side, we need to take account of 5G that is being introduced. And then also some of the other aspects, for example, the China Belt Road Initiative, where they're investing into Africa. So in terms of the regulatory framework, you want access to courts, you want your IP to be protected, systems whereby you are able to register that. Now, within many of the African countries, if you look at their IP framework following the WIPO models, they provide for the protection of particular rights. If we look at some of the issues when we're dealing with COVID-19, if we look at how do we ensure that there is free or accessible vaccines and so on, we do sit with some of the African countries following the process whereby there can be compulsory licensing to provide access to those countries. So I just think generally in terms of it's an enabling framework that the various African countries must provide. Now, within Africa, we also sit with various regional economic communities. If you take in the south, we've got the SADC region. Up west, we've got ECOWAS. In east, you've also got the various economic regions over there now. Within the economic regions, they sit with various directorates. Some of the directorates, for example, deal with a policy, it deals with a trade, and certainly within the structure, generally when you look at one first has to obviously have the particular policy, and if the policy in terms of RegTech and investor capital investments in the region, if similar policies are adopted within the various regions, then below that you would then have the legislation that must be introduced in the various countries, and setting up the regulatory framework would then be the statutes in each country, followed by the administration, and that is the regulations that whereby the particular statutes would then be implemented. And that effectively would then give parties access to courts and access to the particular regulatory structures within those countries. So effectively, it's about the various regions that are already in place. following a similar policy and then having similar systems introduced in the various countries, which would then create an enabling environment for a model whereby the various countries can follow a particular model. I think those are just the key points that I wanted to raise.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.